The airport was busy, as always, with people hurrying in every direction. Travelers moved like rivers of motion, some dragging luggage behind them, others pushing strollers, and a few standing still, scanning the departure boards for their gates. The air smelled of coffee, perfume, and the faint hint of cleaning products. Announcements echoed across the terminal, mingling with the rolling of suitcases and the soft chatter of families. Amid all this, she walked slowly, holding her small bag close, feeling slightly out of place among the hurried crowd. She had always been drawn to music, though life had not made it easy for her to practice as much as she wanted. Today, however, she felt a strange pull, a small curiosity that led her past the busy main hall. There, tucked in a corner away from the main flow of traffic, was a simple piano. It was nothing fancy, just a regular upright piano, with a few scratches and marks from years of use. Most people ignored it, some passing by without even noticing it, and a few had glanced at it and quickly walked on. But something about it called to her. For a moment she hesitated. Her fingers itched to play, but a voice in her head whispered doubts. What if she was out of practice? What if people laughed at her? What if she made a mistake in front of strangers? Her heart pounded as she stood there, staring at the keys, the noise of the airport fading a little as she considered the decision. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. The piano had been here for years, and today, for some reason, it felt as if it was waiting for her. She finally sat down on the bench, her small bag placed beside her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, shaking slightly. She closed her eyes and remembered the first time she had ever played in front of someone. It had been at a school recital, and she had been terrified. But the music had flowed from her fingers, and she had felt alive in a way nothing else could give her. She hoped that same feeling might return today, even in this unusual setting. Her first notes were soft, almost hesitant. They barely rose above the background noise of the terminal. She played a simple melody, one that she had known for years, something comforting and familiar. As she played, she noticed a few travelers glancing up, their eyes lingering for a moment before they turned back to their phones or conversations. She kept playing, focusing on the sound of the keys beneath her fingers, the rhythm of the music slowly calming her nerves. She thought about why she was here at this airport in this moment. Her life had been full of challenges and small victories. She had learned to rely on herself, to find joy in simple things, and music had always been a quiet companion. Today it was more than a companion, it felt like a chance to reconnect with something she had put aside, a chance to feel like herself again, even if just for a few minutes. The terminal continued to buzz around her. A child ran past, giggling, their mother chasing after them. A man in a suit muttered into his phone, moving quickly, unaware of the small performance taking place nearby. Announcements continued, calling for boarding, gate changes, and lost luggage. Yet, for her, the world seemed to slow down a little as her fingers danced across the keys. Each note, each chord, felt like a small victory against the constant rush of life around her. She allowed herself a small smile, surprising herself with how natural it felt to be here, in the middle of chaos, making music. She had worried that no one would notice, that her playing would be swallowed by the noise of the airport, but it didn't matter. For now, it was enough that she was playing, that the music was flowing, that she was alive in this moment. She noticed the texture of the piano keys beneath her fingers, smooth and worn from years of use. It was comforting in a strange way, a reminder that even things that seemed ordinary or overlooked could hold beauty and meaning. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, exploring the keys, finding little variations, experimenting with timing and dynamics. The music began to fill a small space around her, cutting through the chatter and footsteps, creating a pocket of calm. A few people paused to listen more closely, drawn by the sound. Some stopped walking, some turned their heads, and one older woman leaned against a nearby pillar, her eyes closing as she listened. A teenager carrying a backpack slowed down, glancing at the piano with curiosity. These small reactions encouraged her, though she didn't yet realize how far-reaching her music might travel. Her thoughts drifted as she played. She thought about the first song she had ever learned, the hours spent practicing scales, the feeling of accomplishment when she finally mastered a difficult passage. She thought about her family, the support and the sacrifices, the people who had encouraged her even when life got hard. And she thought about the airport itself, a place of comings and goings, of stories intersecting for a moment before moving on. Here she was, just a small figure among thousands, yet creating something that might touch even a few hearts. Time seemed to blur. She lost track of minutes, lost track of the announcements, lost track of the people rushing past. Her focus was entirely on the music, on the connection she felt with the piano, and on the simple joy of making sound. The melody was no longer just familiar. It became an expression of her emotions, of the quiet longing and hope that she carried with her. She glanced around and saw a young man pausing nearby, his eyes fixed on her hands as they moved over the keys. He smiled slightly and then stepped back, not wanting to interrupt, but clearly appreciating what he was hearing. Others began to linger too, drawn by the unexpected beauty in such an ordinary place. The airport, with all its chaos, suddenly felt a little smaller, a little warmer, as if the music had created a temporary sanctuary. The piano had not seemed intimidating at all now. It was a friend, a companion, a place where she could be herself without fear or judgment. She played a few more notes, experimenting with a gentle variation on the melody, and felt a small thrill as the sound filled the terminal. Each chord, each movement, reminded her that even in the busiest, most ordinary places, there could be moments of extraordinary beauty. A deep breath, and she played one last phrase slowly, letting the notes linger in the air. The terminal continued its rhythm around her, but for a brief moment, she felt as though time had paused. She looked at the piano with gratitude, touched by the simplicity and the possibility it represented. She realized that even small acts, like sitting down to play, could have significance beyond what she could see. As she stood to leave, she noticed that a few more people had stopped to watch, a quiet acknowledgement that she had shared something meaningful, even if only for a few moments. She smiled softly, feeling lighter, more connected to herself and to the world around her. The ordinary airport, the simple piano, and the brief moment of courage had created a memory she would carry with her. She picked up her bag and walked toward her gate, her heart a little fuller, her mind buzzing with the possibilities that lay ahead. The noise of the airport returned to its normal pace, but she carried a small piece of calm with her. The piano would wait there for the next person, but for now it had been hers. The ordinary had become special, and she had taken the first step toward something that felt larger than herself. She moved through the crowd, ready for her flight, but not quite ready to let go of the quiet magic she had just created. She sat back down on the piano bench, her fingers brushing lightly over the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath her fingertips. The memory of her earlier hesitation had faded, replaced with a quiet determination. The first notes she struck were tentative, almost shy, as if testing the space and the ears around her. She played a familiar melody, something simple yet full of warmth, hoping it would settle her nerves. The airport noise surrounded her, but in that moment, the sound of the piano created a small bubble of calm that made everything else fade slightly into the background. Her mind drifted to the first time she had truly fallen in love with music. It was at home, sitting beside an old piano in a living room filled with sunlight. Her hands had been small and clumsy, but the sounds they made filled her with a joy she could not describe. Life had taken her through many twists since then, but the love for music had never left. It was comforting, like an old friend waiting for her to return. And today, in the middle of the bustling terminal, it felt like that friend had come back to keep her company. The initial audience was small. A few travelers paused briefly, glancing curiously at the woman playing, but most continued on their way. Yet she didn't mind. She was not playing for them, not really. She was playing for herself, for the release, for the sense of being fully present in a moment that belonged only to her and the piano. The music began to flow more freely as she continued, her fingers finding their own rhythm and strength, reconnecting with memories of hours spent practicing alone. Late into the night, a mother with a toddler stopped nearby, gently lifting her child, so the little one could watch the keys move under her fingers. The child's eyes widened with fascination, and a soft giggle escaped the small mouth. The mother smiled, a look of appreciation on her face, though she remained silent, letting her child absorb the music. The presence of the child and the mother's quiet attention gave her a subtle encouragement she had not expected. It reminded her of the power of music to reach across ages, to touch people in ways words could not. She moved from one piece to another, selecting melodies that reflected her mood. Some were soft and reflective, echoing the quiet longing she felt inside. Others were a little more lively, carrying a sense of hope and curiosity about the future. She played slowly, carefully, letting each note speak for itself. The melody drifted through the terminal, intertwining with the footsteps, the rolling luggage, and the distant calls of the boarding announcements. It was as if her music wove a small thread of serenity through the constant motion of the airport. The woman noticed a teenager leaning against a pillar, headphones around the neck, watching her hands move over the keys. The teenager's expression was a mixture of surprise and admiration. She smiled softly at the sight, appreciating that her music had found a connection even in someone who had not expected it. There was no applause yet, no loud recognition, but she felt an invisible thread linking her to those who paused to listen. The realization gave her courage to play more expressively, to let her feelings seep into the music without reservation. Her fingers began to explore the keys with more confidence. She added subtle changes in timing and dynamics, experimenting with variations she had never dared to try in public before. Each chord seemed to resonate not just with the piano, but with the space around her, bouncing gently off the walls and filling the terminal with warmth. The sound carried further than she had expected, reaching ears she could not see, creating small moments of surprise and delight in the strangers around her. A businessman walking briskly slowed his pace, glancing over his shoulder, curious about the source of the music. A woman carrying a stack of folders paused, her eyes softening as she listened. Even the security guard at the far end of the hall leaned slightly to catch the melody before returning to his duties. Though no one spoke, the atmosphere around the piano shifted. The music had begun to create a quiet ripple, a shared experience in the middle of the busy, impersonal airport. As she continued, she allowed herself to become completely absorbed in the music. Thoughts of her worries, her plans, and the stresses of life melted away with every note. She was no longer just a woman sitting at a piano in a crowded terminal. She was a musician, a storyteller, a creator of small miracles. The airport, with all its noise and haste, faded into the background as she played, and the only reality that mattered was the music flowing from her fingertips. Her hands moved with a combination of memory and instinct, striking chords that seemed to echo her emotions. She thought of the times she had doubted herself, the moments she had felt too small or unimportant, and she let those feelings pour into the melody. There was sadness, yes, but also hope, resilience, and a quiet determination. Each note was a piece of herself, offered freely into the world. A small crowd began to form, almost unnoticed at first. A few people lingered, glancing up from their phones, drawn by the unexpected beauty of the music. Some smiled quietly, some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Even the hurried travelers who continued walking seemed to carry a little more calm in their steps, touched in ways they couldn't yet name. She did not seek attention, but the growing presence of listeners filled her with a subtle warmth. The music was connecting her to strangers, and the realization was both humbling and exhilarating. She played a particularly tender piece, one that carried a soft, melancholy undertone. It reminded her of quiet evenings at home, of moments spent alone with her thoughts, of longing for something just out of reach. The notes lingered, delicate and poignant, drawing the attention of everyone nearby. She noticed a man standing with his arms crossed, his eyes closed, as if he were remembering something important from his own past. The effect of the music, small and unexpected, reminded her why she had returned to the piano after all these years. The melody shifted, growing slightly more upbeat, filled with subtle hope and curiosity. It was not triumphant or grand, just simple, honest, and human. She felt her pulse quicken, her heart open, as the music carried a quiet confidence she had not felt in a long time. The small gestures of attention from the audience encouraged her, but even if no one had been listening, she would have played the same. It was about connection, not recognition, about expression, not applause. Minutes passed, though she did not count them. The music became more fluid, her fingers more certain. The terminal seemed to notice the change, the hum of activity around her adjusting slightly, as if respecting the small space she had created. Travelers shifted more gently, voices softened, footsteps slowed, and the piano became a center of calm in the ever-moving crowd. She allowed herself to smile, realizing that a few notes could transform not just her own mood, but the atmosphere around her. That a young boy tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing at the piano. The father smiled and nodded, lifting the boy slightly so he could see better. Their eyes shone with curiosity and wonder, and she felt a small, warm connection with them, fleeting but real. It reminded her of the universality of music, how it could touch people regardless of age, background, or destination. Even in the middle of a busy airport, something simple could create a moment of shared humanity. As she played, she became aware of a subtle energy in the air, a quiet attention from the people around her. Some were standing still, some leaning, some simply pausing and passing. All were listening, if only for a moment, and the realization that her music had the power to momentarily alter someone's day filled her with gratitude. She had never sought to perform for strangers, but she now understood the quiet magic of connecting through music, of offering a piece of herself without expectation. The airport announcements continued, calling flights and gates, but they felt distant now. The sounds of the piano created a harmony with the life around her, softening the edges of the busy terminal. She experimented with gentle variations, slight pauses, and dynamic shifts, letting the music breathe naturally. Her fingers moved with confidence, guided by instinct and memory, each note flowing into the next. The simple tunes became more expressive, more reflective of her emotions, and she felt the music transforming, becoming not just a pastime, but a story she was telling in sound. A woman with a notebook stopped nearby, scribbling quietly as she listened. Perhaps she was inspired, or perhaps she simply wanted to remember the moment. The awareness that her music could inspire, even subtly, filled her with quiet pride. She did not perform for recognition, but the knowledge that her small act had meaning reinforced the joy she felt. The piano, once a source of hesitation, had become a vessel for connection, expression, and shared human experience. By now, she was fully immersed in the moment. Her thoughts wandered freely, flowing with the music. Memories, hopes, and emotions intertwined with each note, creating an intimate dialogue between her and the world around her. She no longer felt nervous, nor did she care about passing judgments. All that mattered was the simple act of playing, the joy of creating, and the subtle awareness that she was touching lives, even if only briefly. As the piece drew to a gentle close, she allowed the final notes to linger, soft and delicate, fading into the background hum of the terminal. A few people remained, quietly appreciating the beauty of what they had just experienced. She felt a deep sense of calm, a feeling that had been missing for a long time. The piano had given her a gift, a moment of clarity and connection, and she felt grateful for the courage to sit down and play. She knew, even if she had to leave in a few minutes, that this moment would stay with her, a reminder of the simple power of music and the quiet impact it could have on the world around her. The music had begun to flow effortlessly from her fingers. Each note seemed to find its place naturally, blending with the sounds of the terminal yet standing out clearly to anyone who paused long enough to listen. The once tiny audience had grown without her realizing it. People who had been walking by slowly began to linger, some leaning against pillars, others standing just out of the path of the busiest travelers. A few travelers who were initially hurried had stopped mid-step, captivated by the unexpected beauty. Her hands moved more confidently across the keys now. She played with emotion, letting the soft, flowing notes rise and fall like gentle waves. She could feel the energy in the room shifting subtly. The terminal was no longer just a place for people to rush past one another. It had become a shared space, alive with attention, curiosity, and quiet appreciation. Even those who had originally ignored the piano found themselves drawn toward it, their ears and hearts catching the music like an invisible thread. A man with a briefcase paused near the seating area, his phone forgotten in his hand. He tilted his head, listening closely, and a faint smile appeared on his face. A mother holding her young child let the little one rest against her shoulder, eyes wide as they absorbed the melody. Even airport staff seemed to notice, their movements slowing just enough to acknowledge the music without interrupting their work. For the first time that day, she realized that something ordinary, a simple piano and a decision to play, was creating an impact beyond what she could have imagined. She shifted into a slightly more complex piece, a melody she had learned in her childhood, but had rarely played in public. The notes came easily, but they carried more emotion than she expected. There was longing, a touch of sadness, and beneath it, a quiet strength. The music seemed to speak directly to those who were listening, connecting with their own emotions and memories. The terminal felt different now, almost lighter, as if the music had lifted some of the usual weight of the space. The crowd continued to grow, though quietly, without rushing. Travelers paused to watch, some leaning casually against walls, others standing stiffly but attentively. A teenager, headphones around their neck, had moved closer and watched intently, eyes wide with fascination. She could see their curiosity, and the awareness that her music was holding their attention made her feel a subtle thrill. She had never intended to perform for strangers, but the thought that her playing could touch people she would never meet was both humbling and inspiring. She allowed herself to experiment with dynamics, striking some chords firmly, letting others remain soft and gentle. The contrast created a sense of movement, and she noticed people leaning in subtly to catch every note. The sound seemed to reach beyond the immediate space, echoing softly off the walls and blending with the distant hum of the airport. A sense of harmony had formed, a small, invisible connection among strangers who would otherwise have moved past one another without noticing. In that moment, the piano had transformed the terminal into something more than just a place to catch flights. A woman seated nearby began tapping her fingers lightly against her notebook, almost unconsciously, as if keeping rhythm with the music. A couple walking hand in hand slowed their pace, glancing at the pianist, smiles appearing on their faces. Even the young boy who had been lifted onto his father's shoulders in the previous part seemed to be swaying gently to the melody. These small responses, subtle as they were, reinforced her confidence. She had found a language that needed no words, no introductions, and no permission. The music itself was enough. As she continued, she noticed the physical sensations in her hands and arms. Her fingers moved with precision and care, each touch deliberate, yet flowing naturally. She had spent years practicing alone, and now all of that effort was coming together effortlessly. Each note, each chord progression, felt alive. She felt a deep satisfaction, not from recognition or applause, but from the simple act of creating. It was a connection to herself, to her past, and to the people around her. She began a softer piece, one that carried a reflective tone. The melody was gentle, quieting the thoughts of the travelers who paused nearby. Some closed their eyes, letting the music carry them for a brief moment away from the stress of travel. She could see subtle shifts in posture, heads tilting, hands relaxing. The music was affecting not just her, but everyone who had chosen to stop and listen. The idea that she could have such an influence, even without speaking, filled her with a quiet awe. Her mind wandered as she played. She thought about the ordinary people who filled the terminal, each with their own story, their own struggles and joys. And yet here they were, united even briefly by something intangible. Music had a power that few other things could achieve. It did not matter what language they spoke, what culture they came from, or why they were traveling. For this moment, they were connected through the piano and the woman who dared to play. A group of teenagers, initially rowdy and laughing, had slowly quieted down, leaning on the railings to watch. Their eyes were wide, and their expressions had softened. One of them whispered something to another, and they smiled, nodding in acknowledgement. The subtle but real change in their behavior reminded her that music could influence mood and attention in ways that were immediate and undeniable. The ordinary sounds of the airport, usually overwhelming, were now subdued by her playing, and the space felt lighter, calmer, more human. She noticed an older man, his hair silver, standing a little apart from the main cluster of listeners. He seemed lost in thought, his eyes closed as he swayed ever so slightly to the music. She wondered what memories the melody had triggered, what emotions were stirring within him. She did not need to know, and perhaps she never would, but the realization that her music could reach someone so deeply was incredibly moving. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a bridge, a messenger, a tool to communicate what words often could not. A sudden announcement briefly interrupted her concentration, calling passengers to board. But the crowd around her hardly moved. People continued to listen, their attention anchored by the unexpected beauty. Some travelers checked their watches, reminding themselves of schedules, but their eyes never left the piano. It was as if the music had created a small, timeless space in the midst of a place designed for constant motion. She transitioned into a slightly faster piece, her fingers dancing lightly across the keys. The melody was uplifting, carrying a sense of hope and subtle joy. She noticed smiles appearing on faces, small nods of appreciation, and even a few subtle claps from travelers who could not resist acknowledging the performance. The energy in the terminal shifted slightly, becoming lighter and more relaxed. People who had been tense, frustrated, or anxious found themselves involuntarily responding to the rhythm and flow of her playing. Her mind was fully absorbed in the music now. She was aware of the audience but not distracted by it. The music guided her fingers, each note coming naturally, as if the piano itself knew what to play. She felt a sense of freedom, a release from the worries that had accompanied her throughout the day. It was a rare and precious feeling, to be entirely present, entirely focused, and entirely alive in the simple act of creation. A little girl, holding her mother's hand, had stopped to watch, her eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. The mother smiled, pointing quietly to the keys, and the girl's expression lit up. Even small gestures, like the child's fascination, gave her a sense of purpose. She realized that this moment was not about skill, recognition, or ambition. It was about connection, sharing something real and human in an environment that was often impersonal and hurried. She continued to play, moving seamlessly between soft, reflective melodies and brighter, uplifting phrases. Each transition was natural, flowing with the energy she felt around her. Travelers began whispering softly to one another, commenting on the beauty of the music, sharing smiles, and creating subtle bonds in ways that the airport had not anticipated. The piano had transformed the ordinary terminal into a place of communal attention and quiet reverence. By now, she had completely lost track of time. The world beyond the music had faded into the background. Her thoughts, emotions, and experiences were being communicated through sound, and the reaction of the people around her was a silent affirmation of that connection. The music had become a conversation, not with words, but with feelings, memories, and shared human experience. As she prepared to end the piece, she allowed the final notes to linger, soft and tender, filling the space just enough to create a gentle echo. Travelers slowly returned to their paths, but the quiet sense of wonder remained. Some exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the unexpected magic they had witnessed. The young boy, still resting against his father, gave a soft clap, and others followed quietly, their appreciation genuine and heartfelt. She looked around briefly, noticing the subtle changes her music had brought to the space. Strangers had paused, connected, and shared a moment of emotion in an environment usually defined by motion, noise, and deadlines. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a recognition that something small and simple, sitting down at a public piano, could create ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. Rising from the bench, she felt a quiet pride mixed with humility. The piano had not just been an instrument. It had been a bridge, connecting her to others in a way that transcended words. She realized that the music she created, even in a temporary and ordinary setting, had power. It could calm, inspire, and uplift. And in that moment, she understood that the simplest acts could sometimes leave the deepest impressions, touching lives in ways that nothing else could. The terminal had grown quiet around her, not because people were leaving, but because they were completely absorbed. The piano had become the center of attention, a small island of calm and beauty amid the usual rush of travelers. Her fingers rested on the keys for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the hum of anticipation in the air. She could sense that something was about to happen, that the music she played now would be different, more personal, more intense. It was as if the piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of her own heart. She began with a soft chord, letting it resonate slowly, filling the space with a gentle vibration. The crowd leaned in slightly, unconsciously attuning themselves to every note. Then she added another chord, and another, her fingers moving faster, more deliberately. Each note carried emotion, a story in itself, speaking to the people around her without a single word. There was a quiet power in the sound, an honesty that transcended the ordinary, turning a public airport into a private concert hall for anyone willing to listen. Her hands moved with precision, yet there was a natural fluidity to the performance. She played a melody that was complex, intricate, and deeply moving. The music seemed to rise and fall on its own, a wave of sound that pulled the audience into its rhythm. Some closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Others watched in silent awe, mesmerized by the combination of skill, emotion, and courage before them. It was no longer just music. It was a shared experience, an unspoken conversation between her and the people around her. She could feel the energy of the audience changing. The initial curiosity had transformed into quiet admiration, and now into something more profound. Travelers who had been indifferent or hurried were now standing still, captivated by the sound. The mother with the child held the little one closer, and the boy who had clapped before was now clapping softly again, as if trying not to disturb the beauty of the moment. Even airport staff seemed to pause, leaning against counters, listening for as long as they could without interrupting their duties. Her fingers danced over the keys, striking chords that were both strong and tender. She let her emotions guide her, the melodies becoming more expressive, more daring. Each phrase carried a sense of longing, joy, and melancholy, intertwining to form a story that everyone could feel but no one could fully name. The audience was drawn in, their expressions softening, their bodies slowing, as if the music had slowed time itself. Even the constant hum of the terminal, footsteps, rolling suitcases, announcements, seemed to quiet in respect for the performance unfolding in the corner. She glanced up briefly, noticing the faces of the people around her. Some had tears in their eyes, some were smiling faintly, and others were completely still, overwhelmed by the unexpected beauty. There was a sense of collective emotion, a quiet acknowledgement that this moment was extraordinary. She realized that the music was not just reaching people. It was moving them, touching something deep inside that often remained untouched in the rush of everyday life. The melody shifted, becoming more complex and challenging. She moved faster now, fingers flying across the keys, her hands almost a blur. The notes rang out clearly, precise yet full of warmth. It was a difficult piece, one she had practiced many times in private, but performing it in front of strangers brought a different intensity. She could feel the adrenaline mixing with the joy of creation, pushing her to express more fully, to reach deeper within herself. The piano became her voice, and through it, she was telling a story that had no words, but was understood by everyone listening. A man with a camera quietly recorded from a distance, careful not to disrupt the moment. Others held their phones, capturing snippets of the performance, but she barely noticed. She was lost in the music, in the energy that flowed back from the audience, in the shared pulse of emotion. Every note was a thread connecting her to the strangers around her, weaving an invisible tapestry of attention, appreciation, and wonder. She added subtle variations, pauses, and crescendos, letting the music breathe naturally. Each phrase seemed to linger in the air, echoing softly, resonating with the people who had paused to listen. She felt the rhythm of the crowd, their unspoken response, and let it guide her hands. The performance had become a dialogue, one that did not require words but carried meaning, connection, and emotion in every note. She realized that this simple act, which had begun as a small, hesitant attempt, had grown into something far greater than she had imagined. The terminal seemed to hold its breath as she played the climax of the piece. Her fingers moved quickly yet gracefully, the melody swelling with intensity and depth. The sound seemed to fill every corner, bouncing off walls, echoing faintly, creating an atmosphere charged with emotion. The crowd was silent, completely absorbed, and she felt the collective heartbeat of the people around her. It was a moment of pure connection, a fleeting but profound unity created entirely by music. She noticed tears forming in the eyes of a few listeners, subtle but unmistakable. The mother with the child whispered softly, perhaps to explain to the little one the feeling the music brought. A young man clutched his jacket, moved by the melody, and an older woman's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She realized that her playing was evoking memories, emotions, and reflections that each person carried privately. In that instant, she understood the extraordinary power of music to touch lives, to break through the ordinary and reach the heart. The melody softened slightly, becoming more introspective, a gentle lull after the intense climax. She let each note hang in the air, letting the listeners absorb the subtleties of the music. The gentle chords created a sense of reflection, a quiet emotional space in which the audience could feel, think, and breathe. Even the hurried travelers who had stopped only briefly seemed to slow down, caught in the delicate balance of sound and silence. Her heart swelled with emotion as she continued. She had never intended to create such a moment, yet it had unfolded naturally, almost magically. The piano had given her a voice, and through it, she had spoken to strangers without speaking a word. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for the applause or recognition, but for the opportunity to share something meaningful. The simple act of sitting down and playing had transformed a corner of the airport into a place of wonder, connection, and quiet joy. The final notes of the piece approached, each one deliberate, resonant, and full of feeling. She let them linger, fading slowly, creating a gentle echo that seemed to linger in the minds of the audience. The terminal around her remained quiet for a moment. The usual rush of activity paused, as if the space itself was honoring what had just happened. Then, softly at first and then more fully, the people began to respond. Applause started quietly, a few scattered claps, and then grew steadily as more people joined in. Travelers who had only stopped briefly now clapped, some cheering softly, others smiling and nodding in appreciation. The woman looked around, seeing faces filled with emotion, admiration, and gratitude. The music had created something special, something that reached beyond skill and talent. It had touched hearts. It was an astonishing moment, unexpected and deeply moving, a reminder that even ordinary places could hold extraordinary experiences. She stood, hands still hovering over the piano keys, overwhelmed by the reaction. Some people approached her, offering quiet words of thanks, smiles, and gestures of appreciation. Others remained where they were, silently carrying the memory of the music with them. Even the airport staff looked on with respect, acknowledging the small miracle that had unfolded in their midst. She felt a mixture of disbelief, joy, and humility, realizing that a simple piano and the courage to play had created an impact far greater than she could have imagined. As the crowd began to disperse slowly, the energy lingered. The piano, once ordinary and overlooked, had become a vessel of connection, emotion, and shared humanity. The woman took a deep breath, feeling a sense of completion and fulfillment. She had started playing quietly, almost timidly, but now she understood the power of what she had done. The music had not just been notes. It had been a gift, a bridge between strangers, a moment of astonishing beauty in the middle of the everyday chaos of life. The applause had quieted down, but the energy in the terminal remained different from before. Travelers moved more slowly, as if carrying a piece of the music with them. She sat back for a moment, letting her hands rest on her lap, heart still pounding from the performance. She could feel the eyes of a few lingering on her, a mixture of admiration and gratitude, and she realized how much impact a simple act of courage could have. People began to approach her, speaking softly, careful not to disturb the delicate calm that remained. One woman simply said, "Thank you," her voice filled with emotion. A young man offered a shy smile, saying he had never heard anything so beautiful. A child tugged at a parent's sleeve, asking if the piano player could come and play for them every day. She smiled quietly, touched by their reactions, feeling a warmth that went beyond any applause. It was more than recognition, it was connection, a shared acknowledgement of something rare and real. A few people asked if they could take pictures or record a short video. She hesitated at first, then agreed, realizing that these small mementos might help the memory of the music linger. Strangers approached her politely, sharing how her playing had affected them. Some confessed that it had reminded them of someone they loved. Others said it had given them hope on a stressful day. Each comment, each small conversation, added to her sense of fulfillment. She realized that the music had reached far beyond her own intentions, touching lives in ways she could never have predicted. She gathered her bag, preparing to head toward her gate, but a few people remained nearby, reluctant to leave. They asked questions about her music, her background, and if she had ever performed in public before. She answered quietly, enjoying the simple interaction. There was no rush, no pressure, just a human connection that had formed through the shared experience of sound and emotion. It was a gentle reminder that sometimes the smallest gestures can create the deepest bonds. A young man, holding a phone, approached her and said he had recorded part of the performance and wanted to share it online, hoping more people could experience the beauty of what had happened. She nodded, quietly pleased that her music might inspire others beyond the terminal. It was not fame she sought, but the idea that her simple act could ripple outward, touching strangers far beyond the moment itself, gave her a quiet sense of purpose. The airport staff, now more relaxed, smiled as they passed by, acknowledging the brief but meaningful transformation in their workplace. Even the security guard who had initially glanced curiously now offered a nod and a small word of thanks. The terminal, usually a place of hurry and routine, had become a temporary haven of emotion, reflection, and human connection. She felt a deep appreciation for the way music could create shared understanding in a place where people often felt disconnected and distant from one another. She reflected on her own journey, the hesitations and doubts she had felt before sitting down at the piano. It seemed incredible that a simple decision, a moment of courage, had led to this unexpected impact. She had returned to something she loved without expectation, and yet it had given her far more than she could have imagined. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the simple opportunity to share her gift, and for the courage to do so without fear. Travelers slowly began to return to their routines, boarding flights, moving toward gates, and continuing their journeys. But she noticed subtle changes. Some seemed lighter, their expressions softer, carrying a piece of the music with them. A child hummed quietly as they walked, a man smiled at a stranger, and a mother squeezed her child's hand with tenderness. She realized that the moment she had created, though brief, had left a lasting impression, invisible yet powerful, in the hearts of those who had listened. She walked toward her gate, her steps calm, carrying a quiet pride and satisfaction. The piano, now empty and waiting for the next traveler, seemed ordinary again, yet she knew the memory of what had happened would linger. The simplicity of the instrument and the courage to play had transformed not just her day, but the day of those who had stopped to listen. It was a reminder that extraordinary moments often arise from the most ordinary places, and that courage and authenticity can create impact far beyond what we can see. As she moved through the terminal, she thought about the future, the opportunities and possibilities that lay ahead. The performance had reminded her of the power of music and the importance of sharing one's gifts without hesitation. She felt a renewed sense of purpose, a quiet determination to continue embracing moments like these, to connect, to express, and to share with the world. The airport, a place of transience and routine, had offered her a space to reconnect with herself and with others in a profoundly human way. She reached her gate and paused briefly, taking one last look around the terminal. The memory of the people who had stopped, of the shared smiles, the soft applause, and the quiet attention, stayed with her. She realized that moments of connection, though fleeting, had a lasting impact. The music had done more than entertain. It had reminded everyone present of the beauty and vulnerability of shared human experience. It had created a ripple of emotion, extending beyond the immediate space and time, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. As the boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, she felt ready to continue her journey. The performance had given her confidence, inspiration, and a renewed sense of purpose. She carried with her the knowledge that even small actions, when performed with courage and sincerity, could create extraordinary effects. She walked onto the plane with a calm heart, knowing that the memory of the piano, the terminal, and the people she had touched would remain with her. The passengers settled into their seats, the engines began to roar, and the plane started its journey into the sky. She looked out the window at the shrinking airport below, thinking of the stories unfolding within the terminal, the people carrying memories of the music she had played. The thought brought a soft smile to her face, a quiet reassurance that the simple act of playing the piano had created a lasting impression. It had been a reminder of the beauty of human connection, of courage, and of sharing one's gifts freely. She settled back, feeling a sense of completion and fulfillment. The ordinary had become extraordinary through her music, and the experience had changed her in ways she could not fully articulate. She knew that she would return to music, to playing, and to connecting with others in similar ways, carrying the lesson that even the smallest decisions can create profound effects. The piano at the airport, once unnoticed, had become a symbol of possibility, courage, and the quiet power of human expression. As the plane ascended, she closed her eyes, letting the memory of the music and the audience flow through her mind. She thought of the faces, the smiles, the quiet gestures of appreciation, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The journey ahead was unknown, but she felt ready, carrying with her the reminder that the simplest acts, when performed with honesty and courage, could create moments of astonishing beauty. The memory of that day, the piano, and the people she had touched would remain a guiding light, a source of inspiration, and a reminder of the extraordinary power of music and human connection.